Welcome to the Wildlife Wire. I'm Mark Searles,
And I'm Samantha Miller.
and this is your source for wildlife news and the people that make it. On today's episode, we have poaching in Utah, beavers in the UK, a superpod off the coast of California, and nutria in Texas.
Well, hello, Mark. How are you today?
I'm lonely, Sam.
Can you tell me why?
My podcast partner isn't even in the same state as me anymore.
Yes, I am in Eugene right now with many of our environmental colleagues plotting how we can be effective in this new administration and still save some wild animals. But you are missed very much.
Well, I'm glad that we have representation from Project Coyote there, and who Renee Seacor, and she will be our special guest interview today. But yeah, maybe next year I'll get up there. So I know y'all are plotting, and probably are you in a volcano? Is that where this takes place?
Yes, obviously, all of our big plans are made in the interior of a volcano, as all layers should be located in interiors of volcanoes. And so we'll go there after I am done recording this. I'll go inside the volcano. We'll make some choices, come back, and I'll let you know how it goes.
So, sounds great, and Godspeed. Well, before you dive into the depths of liquid hot magma, what kind of news do you have for me today?
I have a mixed bag of news, but I think I'll kick us off with a really interesting and sad story out of Utah, where they found 11 raptors, owls, hawks, eagles have been poached in Utah while they were roosting or within barns. And so they're trying to figure out who has killed these birds and why they've killed these birds. In the past couple years, we've also had a pair of California condors poached too. So knowing that these animals are sensitive and endangered, it's really important to figure out how to coexist with them. And I'm surprised because they do have the bodies, so I'm not sure the purpose of the poaching. But Utah is certainly looking for the poachers, and I think that we need really strong poaching legislation in most states because unless these crimes are solved and prosecuted, which is really hard, it's a lot harder to deter that activity. So, sad news out of Utah. Raptors are an unusual animal to have poached, and if anyone has any leads, you can get in touch with Utah Game and Fish, and they will work through their legal framework to solve it. And I'm wishing them the best of luck in solving this investigation.
Yeah. I can't think of, kind of like with conflict otters from a few episodes ago. I can't think of why someone would take it upon themselves to go out and poach these birds. I know they can take chickens and things like that, but I mean, this sounds more like someone's idea of a very sick good time.
Yeah, and this is happening in Beaver County, so it's close to Salt Lake City, but not that close. It's 230 miles southwest from Salt Lake. And they do have some witness reports that are indicating that people are shooting the raptors where they're resting at night. And it's even involved people that have trespassed on private property and shot raptors. So again, I think I said Utah Game and Fish. It is actually the Utah Natural Resources Department is who's investigating, and they're protected by state and federal laws in the state of Utah.
Well, I wish them the best to bring justice for these fallen raptors. Are you ready for me to bring us up a little bit?
I guess. Okay, yes, I'm ready now. Go
Okay.
ahead.
So this is pretty cool. So off of the coast of California, a rare video captures a super pod of 2,000 dolphins breaching and playing.
Oh,
And I learned something from this. One, so it's two species of dolphins. The one species is the Pacific white-sided dolphin, that they have several hundred there, and then the other species is the northern right whale dolphin, not to be confused with the right whale
Right.
that
Only
turns
turns
right
right.
and ends up in Alabama. So I was confused at first. I was thinking, well, is this a typo? Do they mean right whales and they're throwing dolphin on there? So I looked it up. And so what makes a right whale and a right whale dolphin, what gives them their character is that they lack a dorsal fin. And my favorite quote from this article is from a captain and a videographer on a private boat tour company. And he says, they're all smooth. When they jump, they look like flying eyebrows.
Flying eyebrows. Nice. Wow. I have always wondered what a flying eyebrow looks like. So I'll have to watch this and we can link to the video then of this super pod.
Yep, yep. You can see the video in the article. It's super cool. And as much as I like the idea of flying eyebrows in the ocean, I I just am not seeing it. But good for him and and what we can all look at something and get our own ideas.
And is it typical for different species of dolphins to travel together, or is that what makes this pod super?
Well, the thing that makes it super is because they're dolphins and dolphins are naturally super awesome. But
Uh-huh.
then the other thing that is unusual is one, the amount of animals that have gathered. I don't think the interspecies part is as unique. So it's the amount and then also where the dolphins are. So the northern right whale dolphin is often spotted farther away from shore and in deeper waters, but they have joined with the California white-sided dolphin and have moved closer to the shoreline. So the size and where they are the two real defining factors that make this a news story.
Yes, yes, their powers combined make them super, which is really cool. So I look forward to watching that video. Are we ready to talk about some aquatic rodent species now?
Yeah, let's do two in a row. What do you think?
I think two in a row sounds great because we all know, well, beavers are one of my favorite animals. And they're my favorite animal because they do an awesome job at creating fantastically diverse ecosystems. They are our allies in the war against climate change. They engineer cooler waters. Their waterways that are beaver managed watersheds are great mitigation for wildfire. And they are adorable with their silly orange teeth and their big tails. Uh, but beyond how much I love beavers, so Europe also loves beavers, and England in particular is has reached a critical milestone to launch a licensing system for releasing beavers into the countryside. And the English have really been wanting this for a long time. And they've wanted this beaver mitigation. They've wanted these beaver ecosystems. And so now the government is setting out support for landowners and farmers who want to make space for the animals. They see beavers as a keystone species. Much like North America, they completely decimated their beaver population 400 years ago because of trapping and to sell their pelts. But they are making a comeback, and the English are excited to have the beavers. The government's working with them on it. And they are also doing really cool research about it, about how the dams and ponds and wetlands they create really boost the biodiversity in each region. So that's my positive news on beavers. We should all have them around us much more.
Yeah, yeah. I want to talk about their teeth. One, I feel like the British, at least the old stereotype, the British must love their teeth being all
No,
big and
no,
orange and
no.
no, I'm sorry. Brits have beautiful teeth. But the second thing is, do you know why they have orange teeth?
Tell Mark.
It's due to a high presence of iron in the enamel, because that allows them to gnaw through like wood and things, and without damaging those big, beautiful orange teeth.
Wow. And do they get darker over time or are they born with orange teeth?
Look, I do minimal research, okay?
All right.
So
All right. I take it back. I will research on my own about the beaver's teeth orangeness trajectory. Um, but no, very cool. I didn't know about the iron piece. So it actually fortifies their teeth.
yeah, yeah, it
Yeah.
certainly does. There we go. A little bit of beaver tooth knowledge. And guess what?
What
My little critter also has orange teeth.
it does. Does it have a flat tail though?
It
Or are we looking
doesn't.
at a different type of aquatic rodent?
You know what? It doesn't have a flat tail, but the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services say it makes delicious gumbo.
Oh God. Okay. Wow. I was not expecting our news to take that turn. But go ahead. Let's hear what's going on, Mark. What you
So,
got for us?
new campaign encourages Texans to eat invasive swamp rats.
Ah, tell me more.
I love this, and I'll get into where I fall in a minute. But so Nutria, who came from South America, they were brought here in the 1800s for guess what? Fur trade. Yeah,
I knew it.
yeah. So unfortunately, the invasive pest began to escape captivity in the 1940s. And then since then, they've been reported in at least 40 states. And they devour the marshlands. So they really, they're one of those species that didn't evolve here. And so when they got here, the habitat wasn't ready for their presence, and they cause huge damage, even with crops as well. And so U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services has started this save us. I just love this so much.
It- Go
Save a
ahead.
swamp, saute a nutria campaign.
I mean, are pythons next? I'm guessing pythons will be next. Make yourself a python nugget.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
okay, so save a swamp, saute a nutria, and so are is your mouth watering? Are you going to go kill some nutria and saute a rodent?
Well, it says that it's a lean and mild meat that's
Uh-huh.
compared to rabbit or dark meat of turkey. I prefer dark meat of turkey, and I don't mind rabbit. I do eat almost a complete plant-based diet these days, but I would certainly eat nutria. I think one, uh, being able to reduce the number of invasive species on the landscape, but then utilizing that meat. I mean that I'm all for it. I would happily have some nutria gumbo.
Okay, you can do that. Let me know how it goes, and how you like it. But I do think that it's a very innovative approach that we don't usually see within federal agencies to encourage, and it certainly offers a solution for invasive species that puts them to some use of nourishing people's bodies. So yeah, I'll be very curious to see how this turns out. And you were right; I was completely thrown that we were sautéing nutria.
Yeah, and when I lived in Africa for 3 years, I mean, I ate caterpillars, flying ants, mice, the gamut of wild animals, big and small. So I'm not weary of trying a new food, especially if it does a good thing in return. And because I'm always conflicted when it comes to invasive species because they're not inherently doing anything wrong themselves. Like they're just
Right.
trying to be alive like everyone else, and it's not their fault that they ended up here. But at the same time, when they're destroying habitats and displacing other species, then we've got to take that into consideration. So by killing them to reduce their population size and getting a delicious gumbo out of it, I mean, I'm in.
I'm still questioning the gumbo, but yes, I I I I think I hear where you're coming from. And I'm really glad you shared that story. Very interesting. Interesting stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So I hope everyone goes onto their favorite cooking site and figures out how to get a good nutrient nutrients throughout the week.
Okay, well, all right. Well, I'm looking forward to our guest. So
Yep.
there we go.
All right. Well, welcome, Renee Seacor. Renee is the Carnivore Conservation Director at Project Coyote, which I am also employed at. And so we're so thankful to have you on today. It's a, a change of venue settings as far as Sam is not in Colorado with in my area today, but in fact with Renee. And where are y'all right now?
We are at the Public Interest Environmental Law Conference talking about all things environment, animals. We've talked a lot about state wildlife policies, which is why Renee's such an interesting guest today because it gives us the opportunity to really talk about an animal that has been just hunted mercilessly across the country since we started colonizing the United States. So I'm so glad you're here, Renee. And I think that through coyotes, we can learn so much about how state wildlife management works and also learn about how we have these kind of deep seated attitudes about different carnivores than we would about other species.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me.
Yep. Thank you
Excited
for
to
being
talk
here.
about it.
Yeah. So if you could give us a quick background on yourself at Project Coyote and how you ended up advocating for coyotes and all things carnivore in the U.S. And then we'll dive into the state of uh, coyote policy across the country, both things that have worked in the past and then what we're hoping for in the future.
Okay. Yeah. So thanks you guys so much for having me and for, broaching this subject of coyotes, which I know is close to both of your hearts as well as mine. Yeah. So Renee Seacor, Carnivore Conservation Director at Project Coyote. A bit about my background. So I grew up actually in New York and the Hudson Valley region, where we kind of currently, had a long time eradicated our top carnivore species from the eastern US, and then ended up going to college for a wildlife ecology degree out in Montana, which is kind of where I say I got bit by the carnivore bug, but not physically bit, metaphorically bit by the carnivore bug. And I, that happened kind of in the outdoor classroom of just the Yellowstone River ecosystem, where I did a lot of undergraduate wildlife research on primarily birds of prey at the time, but obviously was getting to watch the Yellowstone ecosystem and predator prey dynamics and wolves in Yellowstone National Park. And so got really enthralled with wild carnivores and the benefits that they provide to our ecosystems, and also, witness firsthand kind of the social dynamics of carnivores on the landscape too, and some of the hatred that they are subjected to. I ended up doing a historical research project on predator bounty records with old livestock commission records from the 1800s, and wolves and mountain lions and the bounties that were paid for them across the state of Montana for, I think it was about 90 years that we documented kind of those bounty records, as well as coyotes too.
Did other states also have those bounty records? Is that really how the government was looking at getting rid of animals they saw as less desirable in the landscape with cows and sheep and other animals they did see as desirable?
I think so. Yeah. So my research was just looking at the livestock commission records on a county level that the agricultural commissions were paying out counties across Montana. But I think that those same records exist likely in other Western states that were issuing bounties at the time as well. So yeah, yeah, it would be interesting to compare them. The data is really sad, but it was, also interesting to watch, and we can get a bit into coyote ecology too, but wolf populations and bounties really start to decline, and then coyote bounties that were getting paid out really start to increase as coyotes started to expand their range. But yeah, I think those records do exist in other states as well, which was at the time how they were, targeting kind of extermination campaigns of predators across the US. It was funded by the federal government, and they were paying out those bounty records to try to get carnivores off the landscape, kind of at the behest of agriculture. Yeah.
Yeah, Carter Niemeyer had talked about that when he was younger. He could bring in a couple toes of an animal and get money for killing that animal. And it's really part of our legacy of how we manage carnivores in North America, which makes it pretty tough. And for coyotes, I think that they've certainly had it perhaps the toughest out of most animals because they still are subjected to ongoing killing campaigns. So from where we were with bounties and where we've been with predator extermination campaigns, where where are we now with coyotes and how do states generally manage them?
Yeah, yeah, it's a good question. We've not come very far in terms of, the targeted extermination campaigns that were happening historically. There's states that are still issuing bounties today. South Carolina is one of them that actually, tags coyotes and then will pay bounties for coyotes that are killed that, hunters that go out and get a tagged coyote, they'll actually pay, I think, $500 for those coyotes that are killed. I think Utah still has a bounty program on coyotes. So in terms of the landscape today, unfortunately, it hasn't progressed much from kind of those historical efforts to try to eradicate coyotes from the landscape. But science has obviously progressed, and we've learned that despite our continued efforts to try to wipe coyotes from the landscape, their populations are able to withstand really high rates of mortality. We say it's estimated that there's about 500,000 coyotes that are killed each year in the United States. Wildlife Service, USDA's Wildlife Services program is, responsible for about 70,000 coyotes. I think in 2023 is their current stats of coyotes that federal agency kills, in particular at the behest of agricultural industry. But then coyotes are also targeted through sport killing, wildlife killing contests, which are competitive events that target a whole bunch of carnivore species, but coyotes are the most common target, and award prizes for the killing of the most coyotes or the largest coyote. And those are they've been banned in 10 states, but they're still illegal in the remainder of, those states. And there's also, we could get into some of the lenient policies that coyotes are subjected to, but they're one of the species that has, in most states in the United States, a 365-day season. They typically don't have any bag limits, so pretty unlimited killing, and also subjected to some of the most egregious practices like night hunting, baiting, poisoning by federal agencies like Wildlife Services Program, and even hounding, getting chased down by packs of dogs as well. So we call coyotes the most persecuted, wild carnivore in North America because of what they're subjected to in terms of a lack of policies. And I think that we also say too, they really represent kind of the pinnacle of unethical and unscientific wildlife management in the US. And so really ripe for reform on any semblance of policy reform for coyotes.
Yeah, so I can't help but hear, in Colorado, it's the same 365 unlimited quantity as it is in many states. And how someone could argue that state agencies act with science in mind and allow the unlimited killing of any native species boggles my mind. And I think part of the persecution, and I know part of that persecution is that they are so resilient, and that resiliency has both benefited them, but then been a point where people view it as it's okay. I can kill as many as I want. There's still going to be coyotes. I'm just going to keep killing and killing and killing. And so can you talk a little bit on what makes them so resilient?
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, it's unfortunate because I think that their resiliency and adaptability has actually worked against them in many ways. Right? They've been able to expand their range across the country in the face of intense human mortality. But it means that our efforts have kind of, ramped up as well, in targeting coyotes. But yeah, coyotes, so in particular, their social structure is much more adaptable than, say, wolves, gray wolves on the landscape. And essentially, killing of coyotes actually stimulates increases in their populations by, a disruption of that social structure, which thereby increases both breeding within coyotes as well as migration of dispersing coyotes as well. So typically unexploited coyote populations that, aren't being hunted, trapped, and killed are actually just self-regulating based on availability of food and habitat, and then territorial defense with other coyotes on the landscape. But when they're targeted and, typically only a dominant pair in a pack of coyotes will reproduce, and they'll kind of behaviorally suppress reproduction among subordinate members of the group. But when one or multiple members of a pair are killed, like socially bonded packs will actually break apart, and subordinate members will start to disperse and then find mates and reproduce. And so there's actually more coyotes breeding at younger ages and more pups surviving because there's an increase in available habitat, available territory, and available prey base as well. So these things kind of work together to allow coyotes to really have increases in reproduction after exploitation kind of events. They're also very flexible in their prey base too. They don't have to take down large prey like wolves do. And so they're much more, opportunistic in that they can kind of vary their prey base based on what's available in the landscape, primarily, rodents and smaller prey. But that flexibility, both in their prey, actually allows them to, take advantage of some of our most urban landscapes as well. So we've got coyotes living in places like Yellowstone National Park, some of the most pristine places, but then Central Park and throughout the city of Chicago as well. So that flexibility in prey, and also I'll say too, they're socially very flexible as well. They have what's called a fission fusion society, so they can kind of break apart and live very solitary lives. But they can also live in packs when it's more expedient, for them. So that adaptability and flexibility is something that wolves don't have as much of. They're very much a pack animal. They rely on their pack for taking down large pet prey and, for safety and security. And so that's kind of afforded coyotes the ability to really expand and adapt in the face of human persecution, while wolves have not been so fortunate.
And just to rewind a little bit too, Renee, why are we killing so many coyotes? What are the myths and misconceptions that are perpetuated that makes it so the government actually pays to kill coyotes?
Yeah. So they, coyotes have historically, unfortunately, have been considered, a nuisance species or a pest species. And so historically, their persecution really tied back to agricultural industry, believing that they were a threat to domesticated and farmed animals. And so that is, what kind of the initial impetus for really targeting them for extermination was, to make way for farmed animals and domestic animals and ensure that conflicts weren't happening on the landscape. But going back to that reproduction and coyote ecology, actually targeting coyotes can exacerbate conflict. So it's actually working against the very interests that kind of initially coyotes were targeted for, unfortunately.
Yeah, and you mentioned killing contests, and I wanted to just go back to that because I think it's really, really important to talk about. It's one of the most egregious things that happens to coyotes, and then they'll even include raven or crows or magpie, whatever else they can throw on a list. I don't know if magpies are on there, but I think of them. Like crows and squirrels and prairie dogs and bobcats. And can you explain what a killing contest is and what the purpose of it is?
Yeah. So killing contests essentially are competitive killing events, which are organized and essentially, award cash and prizes for typically a variety of categories. But most commonly, we'll see, the largest coyote killed or the largest fox or bobcat. In the West, we even see species that target wolves in states where wolves are obviously delisted in the Northern Rockies. And even mountain lions in Texas are sometimes targets of wildlife killing contests as well. So they target these species primarily just for cash and prizes, and for awarding trophies and prizes for killing wildlife. And like I said, they've been outlawed in 10 states now, but are still legal, throughout the majority of the rest of the country. And they do target, like you said, it's not just coyotes. Coyotes are the primary target, but you'll also see raccoons, squirrels contests, crows. There's a lot of crow contests that happen across the country. And so there's a lot of species that unfortunately are targeted in these events, which are really, obviously very egregious and inhumane and fly in the face of any science-based 21st century kind of conservation model that we should be following.
And so I imagine that the people that are participating in these contests feel righteous about what they're doing, and that they are providing a service, and by having many people out there at one time targeting these species that are just trying to go about their lives, they are making it easier for society to go on, or some kind of crazy rationale, right? And have you ever got in touch with a former wildlife killing contest person that was involved in these, and maybe changed their ways, or has that not been done yet?
I have spoken to people who have participated in them. I don't know if they've fully been rehabilitated or not on whether they're actively participating. But I will say, we've heard testimony of wildlife killing contest participants in front of Fish and Wildlife commissions that we've been, working on rules to ban them, as well as at the legislative level during testimonies and hearings around bills to ban killing contests. And you're right. I think a lot of those myths and misperceptions that we spoke about in terms of coyotes increasing conflicts, and being, conflicts with domesticated and farmed animals. A lot of times participants of killing contests think that they're helping the agricultural industry by going out and killing as many coyotes as you can during, a given time period at these competitions. But we know that science tells us that that's not true. And so it's unfortunate that it's been so difficult to get the science into it does get into the right hands, but the science to be believed at the kind of legislative and commission level.
Yeah, it is absolutely mind-blowing how science just gets put on the sidestep when it comes to, things that have been continued. It doesn't take long for someone to argue tradition, right, or anything like that, and oftentimes those traditions are based in myths. So, do we have any states that are showing promise for ending killing contests?
Yeah, so 10 states have banned them, at this current moment. And there's actually 7 active states, and some of these are very recent. And I will try to remember this list off the top of my head. But the one most prominently that we've been working on is Illinois, where there's been active legislation for several years. Last year, it was progressed further than it had ever before. It passed the House of Representatives in Illinois. It's now in the Senate, and we're back in front of the legislator to try to progress that bill this session. That would be the first Midwestern state to ban wildlife killing contests. So it's a real priority for us in terms of, looking at the landscape across the country. There's also an effort in New Hampshire. There was a legislative bill introduced, and luckily the New Hampshire Fish and Wildlife and the Commission has said that they have a direct interest in banning these contests at a state level. And so while that bill doesn't look like it will be progressing based on kind of the timeline of the legislator, there will be, rulemaking put forth, hopefully within the next year, to try to ban them in New Hampshire. There will also be a bill introduced any day now in Maine for coyote killing contests specifically, because coyotes are the primary target of killing contests in Maine. So that is a new piece of legislation that'll be introduced. And then we worked with some folks on introducing a bill in Rhode Island as well, where there really isn't that much documentation of killing contests in Rhode Island, but I think proactively they want to ensure that residents don't get ideas about having killing contests start across the state. And then the other East Coast state I will mention is New Jersey has had a bill for quite some time now, and hopefully we'll see some progress on that this legislative session. So I hope that was 7 that I said, but I might be missing one.
I think you got them.
Okay.
And then there's also been efforts at the national level too, correct?
Yeah, so we've had a federal bill that was originally introduced in 2022, and that was sponsored by Representative Cohen in Tennessee. And it's since been introduced. I don't believe it was introduced in 2023, but it was introduced last year in 2024. And it likely will be introduced again. It has a bit of an uphill battle in terms of the future of, getting that bill passed. But I think Representative Cohen's office is very interested in continuing to raise awareness on the issue and having that bill introduced so we can, continue to progress it.
So what are the biggest persuasive arguments that the other side is using when these bills come forward?
Yeah, I think agricultural protection, I would say, right? Protection of ranching and farming communities, and using these as a means to control carnivore species that are targeting farmed animals. We also see a lot of fear-based arguments that happen from the opposition. If we don't kill coyotes or even wolves, these species will start to attack humans or attack our companion animals, which obviously we know isn't true. But I think that those fear-based arguments a lot of times, unfortunately, are easy to kind of fall into and believe. And so that's another common argument that we see. So I would say that those are probably the 2 top arguments that unfortunately shouldn't be persuasive, but they are.
And Renee, since we know the lay of the land, we know these policies, we know coyotes are highly persecuted. I had 2 questions. One, how can we better live with coyotes in our areas and coexist with coyotes? And then 2, how can folks get involved in policies in their local areas?
Yeah, super good questions. Yeah, so we have at Project Coyote, we have a plethora of resources on coyote coexistence. We've got a whole, programmatic area dedicated to coexistence education, and that includes in both urban environments and suburban environments, as well as rural communities as well. So we have a coyote-friendly communities program that works with urban and suburban communities on developing model coexistence plans and distributing coyote coexistence materials on how to really reduce, a lot of times urban and suburban conflicts are due to attractants in backyards and in urban communities that are actually attracting coyotes to, approach and come closer to humans in search of food or water, or, other attractants. So we have these coexistence materials to kind of educate folks on how they can reduce attractants in their yards, humanely haze coyotes to keep them wary of humans and keep kind of those safe kind of coexistence measures. So those materials are available at our website. We also have a ranching and farming with wildlife program that works and kind of promotes non-lethal deterrence methods for ranching and farming communities across the U.S., which are proven to be, more effective than lethal methods at reducing conflict in the long term. So, really encouraging those methods and adoption at among those communities as well.
And what are some of those methods? What did those methods include?
Yeah, so for reducing conflicts with carnivores in kind of a rural landscape, there's things like electrified fencing, which is something that I particularly use. I have backyard chickens and ducks. And so, we've created a predator-proof kind of enclosure with dig defense that, prohibits kind of carnivores from digging into that enclosure, as well as an 8-foot fence, but then also have electrified fencing that surrounds their coop and we have a camera that actually shows, a fox touching his nose against it and getting electrified, and then, realizing, and it doesn't, it obviously hurts, but it doesn't, lethally harm these critters. But learning that that's not a good idea to approach those backyard animals. But there's also, for non-lethals, are context dependent or context kind of specific. So for folks that are, have lambs or cattle, things like livestock guardian dogs are a really useful method. And these are animals that, like Great Pyrenees, will actually live outside with cattle or sheep and actually protect them, guard them from carnivore species. But there's also donkeys and llamas that are used as guardian animals as well. And then range riding is a common method, actually having out there with your livestock in the field to kind of deter the presence of species like wolves or coyotes or other carnivores. So those are just some of the, a few of the tools that exist for ranching communities.
Yeah, I can't help but draw a parallel. I will never be able to look at you without thinking about Friends, now that I realize that you live in New York and you have duck and you have chicken. And so that's I will promise to try to call you Renee and instead of Phoebe or one of the other ones. But yes, there are a plethora of ways, and I always say it. It is a business. Your livestock is your business, and you should protect your assets. And uh, whether it's coyotes, bears, mountain lions, whoever it may be, it's in your best interest to keep your assets safe and away from other beings that might want to take them. So, you know, so we were talking about policy on wildlife killing contest. The other portion I'm really interested in is reducing these year-round seasons that are unlimited harvest for the whole year as well. Are there any states that have tried reducing those seasons? What's the current status on that?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so there have been attempts across the country to limit coyote killing, at least during breeding and mostly pup rearing season. And we have seen success on that in a few states. It's very limited, but last year we were really pleased to see the Michigan Department of Natural Resources actually have their department recommend limiting coyote hunting during the pup rearing seasons. And this put kind of I think it's a 3-month reprieve during pup rearing. So it's still a very long season, longer than typical season for any other hunted species in the state. But at least it's long enough that coyote pups and coyote parents are able to raise their pups to an age where at least they might be able to survive if a parent is killed during a hunting season, and not as dependent on mom or dad for food, by giving them that kind of reprieve. And so that was really promising. It was, the Michigan Department of Natural Resources cited actual concerns over reputational harm to the hunting community as a reason for doing this, for instating this limited, season. And I think there's real fair chase and ethical implications of allowing coyote killing while parents are raising pups, and allowing orphaned pups to be a common practice across the state. And so we were really, pleased to see that happen in Michigan. Unfortunately, there have been other states that have attempted this legislatively, but haven't seen as much success. New Hampshire, there was, I believe, actually it began as a regulatory petition that was denied. And then they went to the legislator to try to get a prohibition on coyote hunting during those pup rearing months. And that was last year. That unfortunately didn't progress. But and Maine was another state that attempted a regulatory and then legislative attempt at getting some restrictions on, during that pup rearing season as well, and that unfortunately failed. The other two states that do have regulated seasons are Maine and New York, and there might be one or two more in there, but it's very limited. The most states across the country currently have that 365-day season, which, is obviously very unfortunate. The last state I'll mention in terms of potential reform that, forward-looking, California in particular is looking into a potential regulatory change around their current coyote regulations. So coyotes are currently regulated in the state as a non-game species, which allows their unlimited, indiscriminate killing. So they're looking at changing that policy, removing them from the non-game list, and starting maybe potentially the promulgation of rules to create a regulated season. And we'll be advocating for, restrictions on hunting, at least during pup rearing, as well as maybe, as much as I hate the word a bag limit to at least limit the number of coyotes that could be killed across, the state by individual hunters. So
Yeah, I know a few years ago, I was very green and ambitious, and I was like, I'm gonna go down to the legislature and I'm gonna get this a shortened season on coyotes. And I met with a rancher legislator who was very nice to give me about an hour and a half, but at the same time spent most of that hour and a half telling me how he loves to shoot the coyotes standing on the ridge looking at his cattle at the feed lot that he runs. So I know one of the big issues in the states that have more ranching is the overlap between pup rearing season and calving. And the lobby coming from the ag community is powerful. And when they're talking about taking away a so-called tool from ranchers during this important time of calving, it ends pretty quickly because of the power that ranchers have. So we've talked a lot about uh, things that aren't so pleasant in coyotes past and some of the really big challenges that they face. Where do you find hope?
well, you're asking that, Mark, at a crazy time in the United States or the world. But I will say it's been amazing since starting at Project Coyote to be involved in 3 state level campaigns to ban wildlife killing contests. And, I mentioned before the efforts in Michigan to at least recognize that, let's not kill coyotes and allow orphaned pups and dens, and seeing maybe some increases in empathy and compassion towards coyotes, which have been a species that's been really hard to get people to empathize and have compassion for. And so I think those small wins, while they're obviously some of the more egregious practices that coyotes are facing, I do consider them maybe a shifting of the needle in terms of the number of people that are showing up and advocating for this species. I mean, we're seeing more, interest across our platforms and people starting to at least question why would we allow, 365 days of killing of coyotes, right? These are animals with strong social bonds, intrinsic value, and just have a right to exist, and shouldn't see 500,000 of them die every year. And so I feel like some of the best wins are even just like in my personal conversations with friends and family who maybe have historically had that same view of coyotes as nuisance or pests and not really seen their value, but starting to see more compassion toward the species. Obviously still a lot to do and start to actually see reform at the regulatory level. But I will say that maybe the needle is starting to shift a little bit, and we'll continue to push it as hard as we can. So.
Absolutely. Compassion and coexistence. Compassion and coexistence. I sometimes I get pushback on coexistence, from the opposition that says, "Oh, you're living in Disneyland. We can't just coexist." And I'm like, look, My grandfather and grandmother coexisted for 50 years in the same house. I'm not talking about loving each other. I'm just talking about not killing each other.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think on that note too, Mark, I'm glad your grandparents didn't kill each other. No, I think it's good to end on a note of hope, Renee, and I appreciate that you've provided that for us. And I do think those interpersonal conversations are so important, whether it's Mark's grandparents talking to each other, maybe sometimes so they're not killing each other, but those conversations with our families. And when we can see individuals brought along on these kinds of conservation policies, I think that's a great reason for hope. So thank you for joining us today, Renee.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you guys so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and quick plug for our newly launched website, projectcoyote.org. It just was refreshed and looking better than ever. So please check it out for all of your coyote facts and how to get involved with helping save our wonderful neighbors. So thank you again, Renee.
Yeah, of course. And actually, just one more plug. So, coming up on March 17th to the 23rd is actually Coyote Awareness Week. And so, we'll be celebrating here at Project Coyote. We'll actually have a toolkit that folks can download. Will get released soon on our website, directing folks on how they can participate in really raising awareness about coyotes, the persecution that they face, and kind of coexistence that they can be doing in their local communities to, teach their communities how to coexist with coyotes. So, yeah, tune into Project Coyote social media around March 17th to the 23rd and check out our website for more information on that.
This has been an episode of the Wildlife Wire with me, Mark Searles, and my co-host, Samantha Miller. Thank you for listening.